We Are Tottenham TV back here again. Ange was on the overlap once again, twice in the space of a week, or twice in 2 weeks. And yeah, I wouldn't say it was as fiery as last week's version where he was drafted in just as Thomas Frank got sacked. But you know, he was on there for an hour and a half, spoke a lot about many different things, Nottingham Forest job, his history in the game, the Tottenham, his time at Tottenham as well. Obviously very interesting, him admitting his mistake of gutting the Forest, and it wasn't the right job for him to take. I mean, it's kind of like what we were all saying at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah,
right? It was just, what are you doing? And he's kind of admitted that. But we've got all the quotes that he did talk about Tottenham in, and we're going to go through them one by one and give you guys a bit of a reaction on them. And the first one he was talking about was that comment of he always wins in his second year. And he said, I always win in my second year. We'd just lost to Arsenal when the reporter asked me, but I thought I've got to double down on this or I'll get eaten alive. If nothing else, it resonated with the players. If I shied away from it, it's a slippery slope, trying to grasp it back. Towards the back end of last year, I had a helmet on, I was copping it, but the players saw I wasn't making excuses and I was still backing them. I never felt I'd lost the dressing room. The players and the staff were always rock solid.
Yeah, and that kind of quote at the end there, losing the dressing room, you know, I think that's kind of been overlooked a lot when it comes to the sacking of Ange and coming in, when Frank coming in, and that element, because a lot of people kind of just thought, well, you know, if you lose that many games, how much could the players have been on side? And there were probably question marks during the season of how much the players were buying into Ange and all that kind of stuff when we were losing game after game. But he said, you know, at the end, he had the players where he wanted them, in the palm of his hand, basically, and he had them on side. So we chucked it away for a very uninspiring character like Thomas Frank. And I think the club massively overlooked that element of it, of how hard it would be to find another manager immediately who was going to inspire the players and get them on side very, very quickly. And in fact, that might have been a big part of Frank's undoing, the fact that he couldn't get them on side. And that was one of the elements why I wanted to keep him, because the players backed him.
The thing is, it's like when you go from a manager that speaks so well and such a good motivator as Ange to go to a Thomas Frank, who I think that's what his biggest undoing was at Tottenham Hotspur, his motivational skills and his man management style and everything like that. Yeah, it was always going to be hard. I mean, we did hear reports, didn't we, when Ange was sacked, saying, well, this Ange sacking could be forcing a player revolt at the time. And obviously, I don't think I believed it at the time, because you're thinking professional players will just get on board with who the manager is, and they'll dust themselves off and go again, going past that kind of initial hurt phase. And I think that did happen. I think the players did try to get on side. Obviously, we saw them fighting tooth and nail in those opening games, the PSG game, the Man City game. But then I think it soon kind of fizzled out quite quickly. And I think it was mainly to do with maybe the motivational side of it all. And Ange was just such a great motivator.
And that's the point, is that you need that kind of character when you're going through the hard times. That's when it makes the difference. And I think we went through a lot of pain last season, and I think Ange's character, in a large way, kind of helped the squad just stay calm. And obviously, when we got to those latter stages of the Europa League, that's when his mentality came to the forefront. But we saw in the tough times under Thomas Frank, the players weren't having it. And it's all well. Everyone says it's all well and good when things are going well, everyone's happy, right? You don't need much like motivating or keeping players on side, because everything's going well, you're winning games. But it's when things are tough, that's when you need that side of it.
Yeah, I mean, yes, agreed. And I think that always came back together around the Europa League run, around that Frankfurt time. But there were like a large part of last season and maybe the back end of the season before where things weren't going right, and he wasn't able to kind of motivate them to turn it around.
I don't think it was a motivational thing at that point. I think, yes, it was a motivational thing when it came to the Premier League games when we had nothing to play for and he couldn't get them up for those games. But I don't think it's a case of they lost trust in him in that sense. I think it was more of, first of all, we lack quality, especially in those bigger games at the back end of his first season when we were losing. I don't think that was a quality issue, of a motivational issue. I think that was, we just weren't good enough from us, and he wasn't good enough. But I don't think it was because they weren't buying into it. I think we just weren't good enough on that front. And then last season, I don't think it was because they weren't buying into him. I just think it was a circumstance we were in. I don't think it was a case of those fractious dressing room or anything like that. And that's what I talk about with Ange, the kind of character he was. Now, I'm not just saying you shouldn't sack him just off of that. Obviously, if you make a decision to sack him, fine, but you need to don't go for someone like Frank, would have been my point. Frank would have been the polar opposite of that, and as soon as things started to go wrong, the players turned on him, and that never happened with Ange, is my point. And I think those things are overlooked when people talk about qualities of managers. You know, everyone focuses on tactically, but I think those kind of things are also very, very important.
Yeah, I mean, ideally you want a mix of both, don't you? That's the reality. And I think Ange was obviously heavily one way. But again, you know, you hear people like Mickey van der Ven saying his tactics, they still believe in his tactics and they could have worked. And look, I always said that Ange's tactics can work, but you need the best players to implement it. And I think that maybe was overlooked and maybe a bit of in Ange's tenure at Spurs. But because that's the thing, like you have a few players out, like one of Romero, Van der Ven out, and the levels just drop so deeply. But the style of play kind of carries on the same, and he doesn't kind of. Oh, he did towards the end, but I'm talking about when you're looking at the whole kind of time at Spurs, he wasn't able to change things when he saw one player out here, one player out there, but the quality in the style dramatically decreased, didn't it?
Mm-hmm, it did. And he goes on to talk about that.
Yeah. When he talks about style philosophy and building Spurs physically and tactically, he says, if you believe in something, you work with the players you have. Saying you play differently with better players is a cop-out. The first year is about building, bringing in players who fit, training the physical capacity because the demands are huge. We went from 2.5-hour tactical sessions to 60 to 70 minutes of high-intensity training. Some struggled, but it was always going to take a year.
Yeah, he was talking about, you know, people saying he blaming him for injuries and stuff, and he was saying how, you know, Jurgen Klopp's first year at Liverpool, they had similar struggles, but he said a big problem was in his first year, you know, he had players like coming off the bench like Perisic and Højbjerg, and in the second year it was very different. He was having teenagers coming off the bench, and then when the injuries hit, they weren't able. They really struggled to cope with it. Whereas in his first season, I know we had less games, but when we did have injuries, yes, we still lost games, but we were in the main better to cope. We were more able to cope with those injuries. You know, we were much better with the injuries, weren't we, in the first year than we were in the second year? Probably less games that helped, but I think probably having senior pros coming in rather than teenagers in their first year in the Premier League probably made a big difference as well.
Yeah, and you have, you know, people that have been there and done it. I wouldn't say been there and done it in terms of, you know, winning the big things and stuff, but, you know, Premier League ready players, as opposed to you're bringing in Bergwall and Archie Gray, who are always going to take a kind of bedding in period and a development period. And even to this day, you know, they're still not, they're very good players in their own right, but they're not of the level of experience of those kind of players that we had on the books at the time. So, yeah, and that goes to say of what we were speaking about last week in terms of how we didn't prepare for that season in the right way. It's a common theme with Spurs, year on, year out, how we don't prepare for seasons in the right way. You know, you can't get rid of experienced players, bring in Archie Gray, 3 teenagers basically, and Adam Solanke, and expect it to get that much better. It's just not going to happen.
Exactly. Yeah, it was a massive failure that summer, and obviously it got exacerbated by the injury problems that we had, but even if we didn't have those injury problems, it was still a massive failure.
Mm-hmm. You're talking about when he says, if you believe in something, you work with the players you have, saying you play differently with better players is a cop-out. Do you think it's a cop-out?
I think what he's saying is, he was asked about managers who basically say, like let's say, for example, I think, I'm just taking a manager at random, but I remember him saying it, Sam Allardyce, who said, oh, you know, if I was manager of Barcelona, I'd also play that way, but manager of this team, I have to play this way.
Yeah.
He's basically saying, look, if you think your way of playing is, if you think you can got a way of playing that can work, then just blaming the players that you have for not playing that way is a cop-out.
Do you think that's true?
To a certain extent, yes. Overall, yes. I think, I guess the point is, he also made a point that there are many, many managers who have gone to different clubs, and they keep saying, and I guess this is what we've seen, they keep saying, at Tottenham specifically, we've seen it, they say they want to play attacking football, then they come here and they don't, even though in the first interview or whatever, first press conference, they all say they want to play attacking football and they don't do it. And maybe they would argue I don't have the players, but he's saying that's a cop out. Why aren't we seeing you instill this style of play if you always want to play it? So I do think in some instances it's a cop out. Now obviously there are sometimes limitations to your squad, and you have to deal with those and adapt to them. And I think maybe there should be some adaptation. But I also think just abandoning kind of your way of playing totally just because you feel like constantly, I don't have the players to do it. I do think in general it's a cop out. Yeah.
Didn't he do that on the Europa League run though?
But he goes on to explain that. Yeah.
But I mean, it is something that he did on the Europa
but he's
League
not
run.
saying. But he didn't do it in general. He did it at times in the Europa League. Yeah, but
obviously, people were using that example of him doing it in the Europa League run with saying that he should have kept his job because maybe he can use that flexibility in the next season. So
he's not. No. You're missing the point. He's not talking about adapting. He's talking about managers who will, like Sam Allardyce, who basically at Bolton, right? He'll have or whatever he was. He'll have a certain way of playing.
Yeah.
And he would say, if only I had, these players, I'll play in a different way. But he never does. He never did it, and he kept using excuses for not doing it. Right. That's kind of what he's talking about. He's not talking about having little tweaks in games or even adapting for certain games or even over a season within that season. He's talking about in general when managers like always use excuses for not playing their way of football. It's a cop out.
But I was always saying with Ange, like, to play his football in a consistent way, like I mentioned before, like you need better players to do it as a whole squad, not just the starting 11, a whole squad. You need some of the best in the Premier League to play it consistently and to get where we wanted to be. It was never going to happen, kind of, in my opinion, with the quality of the squad that we had. Playing that way consistently, we were always going to get found out.
In certain games, yeah. I think we could have been successful. Maybe, I don't know about winning leagues, but we could have been regularly in Europe, for sure.
So, I mean, if he would have shown that kind of style of adaptability a bit earlier, maybe it could have gone in a different way.
Yeah, potentially.
Talking about, so this is what you're talking about, the Europa League strategy and tactical shift. He says, we got to February, we were safe from relegation and there was a narrow path to winning something for this football club and Champions League money. I looked at the recent Europa League winners. They played risk-free, defensively strong football. If we could create that model with the players that we had, I felt we could win it. We did become more direct and more defensively rigid, and that definitely happened. By the end of the final, I put on Kevin Danso, turned to a back four, into a back five, and I think I had about 7 defenders on at one point. I mean, from what he was saying, when I was watching it, it felt like the idea was all his to go more defensively and defensively structured. But then when you hear Mickey van der Ven and what he said, like him and Romero were the ones that led it, there's a bit of, Well,
it's quite funny. He said there's an old adage. He kind of had a bit of a jibe at Van der Ven. He said there's an old adage, success has many fathers and failure is an orphan. He said. Basically, he was saying everyone contributed to the Europa League, but the league was all on me. By the way, he was having a bit of a joke about it. I think there's probably truth to both of it. I think probably Romero and Van der Ven did have a conversation with him about in these Europa League games we need to make sure we get through. But he obviously had to work the coaching staff to implement a style of play. Now, he's kind of implying he was proactive on it. Where how true that is, it's hard to say. Probably, or I don't know. I don't think Van der Ven's making up that they had those conversations about him going to Ange and telling him, look, we need to sit back a bit when we're ahead and stuff like that. But then Ange, said Van der Ven said Ange agreed, and they, have to help implement it on the pitch. So obviously they implemented it with the coaching staff. They came up with a few defensive kind of, ways of playing over the next few months. Yeah, look, maybe there is some kind of
lies being told.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It's hard to say.
Well, there's lies being told in one way, in by one person here, for sure, because.
Well, not necessarily.
Well, I think there is, because I think Ange is like the feeling I got is like from Ange, he was coming across saying like it was kind of all on him. He kind of saw that the team needed more defensive solidity, and it was his decision to go in another way. Whereas,
well, it was his decision.
It was his decision, but he never mentioned kind of like anyone coming to him or anything like that. From what I got from him, it seemed like it all came from him, basically, where Van der Ven made it seem like it came from him and Romero.
Well, they brought it up that Van der Ven had that conversation, so he didn't have to reiterate it. I guess he could have gone on how that conversation went, but
at the end of the day, like, what we got to remember is Ange is out of work, like he did constantly mention throughout the interview, and I think he wants another Premier League job, and he obviously needs to put himself forward in the best light possible to get another Premier League job.
I think all managers in that situation.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I'm saying you got to remember, like, that is a situation he's putting himself in the shop window here.
I think that I think there's probably truth to both of it. I think all what he said is probably true. I don't think he's making that up. But did that happen after a conversation with Van der Ven and Romero? Maybe that's also true. I mean, it probably is also true.
Yeah.
So could he have been thinking about it before Romero and Van der Ven had that conversation? Maybe, but there's no proof of that. So. We just that's what we have at the moment. That's all the information we have. I'd probably say in my opinion, Romero and Van der Ven, that conversation may be a catalyst for what happened in the Europa League. But what he's saying in terms of how he delved into whatever and came up with a plan, I don't think that necessarily a lie either.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the way it probably panned out is that Romero and Van der Ven walk into his office, say, look, we carry on playing like this, we're going to get eaten alive in the Europa League. We need to change something. We need to be more defensively structured and defensively solid. And then Ange was like, yeah, you're probably right. Let me look into it. And then that was the birth of the plan.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Injuries. He's talking about the injuries as well, and he says when Van der Ven and Romero played together, our results over 2 years would have had us in the top 4 both years, just with those two alone. We rarely had them. Some of it was our style and training, and some of it was just physical demands of the Premier League. Once we lost depth, the injuries were being replaced by teenagers, which is definitely true. He was talking about Van der Ven obviously going from the Bundesliga to the Premier League and much more physical demands, and that's maybe what have kind of caused his injuries. He was talking about, I don't know if the quote comes a bit later, about risking Van der Ven a bit too early, and obviously, you know, a lot of fans blamed him, including myself, for him risking him and then him missing a large chunk of the season after that.
Which, he said it was a mistake. In hindsight, he shouldn't have done it.
Yeah, I mean, he should have known it was a mistake at the time, but yeah.
Well, look, at the time, he said the plan was to bring him... He said it went into a bit of detail. He said the plan was to bring him in a week later. And obviously, we got more injuries at centre-back the game before. He said the plan was always to play Romero that game. That wasn't a surprise. He had a toe injury, he got over it, and then he did his quad. And obviously, he wanted to win that Chelsea game. Yeah, here I am. Obviously, he wanted to win that Chelsea game. We got more injuries before, so he said he was in training. It wasn't like he wasn't fit. It was just the plan was to be extra careful and bring him in a week later.
Yeah.
Right. So they brought it forward, and the plan was to play him, I think, 70 minutes. That's why I think it's nothing we haven't heard before. But obviously Romero got injured in that game, and then so there was even more pressure, and so they tried to see if they could push him to the 90. That was a mistake. And he said, in hindsight, given how important Van der Ven was to our team, we shouldn't have risked it. And obviously, he did get injured, and we know what happened. So, I think, look, he admitted it was a mistake. It was a mistake. He said when Van der Ven came back, we did a few things differently and treated him differently, which I think we did saw.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think as well, Van der Ven, I don't think he mentioned it, but there was reports, Van der Ven worked on his running style, would put less pressure on his hamstrings and stuff like that. So some individual stuff that wasn't just the way we played, but also how he was running, which was a problem. So by the end of it, there's an argument to say, could he have overcome it? But we'll never know. But yeah, definitely, it was his mistake, and he have to take responsibility for that, definitely.
He'd have to cop it.
But not for Romero. I think Romero arm was just a bit unlucky.
Romero, it seemed like just a freak kind of occurrence, like a toe and a quad aren't related.
Yeah.
So that was just a freak accident, but the Van der Ven one for sure, he has to take some blame on.
But in terms of what he says, when Romero and Van der Ven were fit, we had our form was good enough for top 4 over the 2 years.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's what I've been saying, compared to when we had Romero and Van de Ven fit under Ange compared to under Frank. We were a much better team, in my opinion. I'm not saying we were amazing, like title challengers, but we were good. Like we were in that top. We would have been in that top 4 conversation if we had them 2 fit, or we had 2 able backups. We just never did. And first season, Emerson and Davis were coming in to play. The next season, it was Gray and Dragoshin, or Davis as well, and
Danso in the second half.
Danso came in second half, yeah, but it just wasn't adequate, was it? If we're being honest, it was a massive drop off.
Yeah,
it wasn't the whole blame, but it was a big part of it.
But that was it. Wasn't it Ange's first summer? That was the summer we sold Sanchez as well, and we just never replaced Sanchez. Like, that's the thing that I've been going on about the last few weeks. We sell him after the transfer window shut, and again, it just goes back to Spurs not preparing well enough for a season, not leaving ourselves with adequate backup. So it's just ridiculous. But I guess it's hard. It is hard, because I think you look at, let's use Arsenal as an example. Now they're all right because they've stocked themselves well. But before, when let's say they had to bring in a Rob Holding or someone at centre back, the quality always massively decreased, didn't it?
They derailed their title challenge a few years ago. Just one, Saliba getting injured, just him alone, it derailed it. We were flying high, and that's how much you can make a difference. And obviously, we're not as good as even them when they were then, and when you have 2 senior centre-backs and then you got a teenager coming in, it makes a hell of a difference. And he was saying, in the interview, if I was to make my case at the end of the season to Tottenham, why I should stay on, which apparently he never got to do. I'm assuming they made the call already. He said he felt it in January. But he said if I was to make a case, I'd put that to them. Say, look, when we have these players, like we are a good team and there is a pathway forward here. And that's kind of how I felt. But I thought, for me, the lesson to learn from is we need to get better players, need better backup. So if that injury does happen, then we can move forward from it, or learn from the injury issues that we have and try and keep them fit. But the lesson we learned was, we just need a different manager and he can get more out of the players, and it just hasn't happened.
Yeah, true. Then he spoke about Romero and Van de Ven specifically. And on Romero, he says, I love him. He's a winner. We wouldn't have won the Europa League without Romero. Part of his frustration as well, when he was asked about his comments about the board and the way he is. He says part of his frustration is he's mixing with his Argentina teammates at club signings, players to win. And he's asking why we aren't. He's talking about players like Enzo Fernandez and other Premier League players that are in the Argentinian squad. And look, when Romero is surrounded by top players at top clubs, I mean, it's obvious he's going to feel that way, isn't it?
Of course, and there's a winning mentality in that dressing room in Argentina. Obviously, you've got Messi there at the forefront, but you've just got a lot of players at a lot of bigger clubs there who it's all like geared to win. At Tottenham, there's that frustrating undertone, isn't it, about the lack of ambition, and obviously we know Romero feels that frustration. Look, he did decide to sign that contract, but things haven't improved from the club's point of view in terms of matching that. And for me, I love him as well. I think he is a winner. I completely agree with what he said. I don't think we would have won the Europa League without him. He was player of the tournament, fantastic in the run-in as well. I think in these big games, especially in knockout games, he has been brilliant in knockout games for us and for at international level as well. I think he really steps up, and he's got unbelievable winning mentality. But he was also asked, does he cross the line? He said, yeah, he crossed the line at training sometimes. And the coaches go, I'd go, well, you have to go tell him. I'm not telling him. You need that mentality in a group. Now, and how you control that, you need to harness that.
Is that not a bit worrying, though? Like, nobody could tell Romero a thing in the training ground? Even the manager.
He might be having a bit of a joke, but I think he's talking about overstepping, like when it comes to overzealous in challenges and stuff like that, and how training. He was a fighter.
How many injuries has Romero caused on his own just in training?
Who knows? But you know what? Some of the best teams in the world have those characters. Mad dogs you don't want to mess with, but he said I'd rather have them on my team than not on my team.
It's true. I agree with that, but like we've heard around before, like Romero gets like different treatment behind closed doors, and kind of like his attitude sometimes doesn't reflect that, where he should be standing above everyone and holding himself to a higher standard, which sometimes we don't see. Sometimes we do, like in the big moments in big games, obviously we do see it, and he's the one to drag us over the line, like in the Europa League final, like in that run, and like in other big games as well. But then again, in other big games, you know, he gets sent off against Chelsea, gets sent off against Manchester United, and sent off against Milan, and you know, these kind of things. So yeah, I mean, it's a hard one to assess.
I think with those things like red cards and stuff, you have to just take the good with the bad. When it comes to like lack of professionalism, like we've heard, like coming in late, maybe even the speaking out against the board and stuff, I think there should be club fines. He shouldn't be protected. I think that should be something dealt with by the club in terms of if you step over the line on that front. Yeah, you should be punished for that, and he shouldn't be given carte blanche to do whatever he wants. Obviously, he needs.
That seems to be the case, though.
Yeah, from that point of view, I agree with you. I agree that's too much. I don't think that's what Andrew's talking about, and I might be wrong, but I think he's talking about in training, he's a real fighter, competitor, and maybe he like steps over the line. He like basically will go into like a full-blooded challenge. I feel in training when maybe other players won't, because they don't want to injure their fellow player, and that kind of stuff with Romero. When it comes to he'll get the odd red card. I mean, at the moment it's more than the odd red card, but over his course of career at Tottenham, it's kind of been the odd red card here and there. I think for me, you just got to take the good and the bad, and either you accept it or you don't. And I'm willing to take the good with the bad. Some people aren't.
I'm just trying to think of like top defenders in the Premier League of late. Obviously, not even defenders, but you know, he mentioned Roy Keane. Obviously, Roy Keane was there sitting with him, and with him, you did something similar where you have to take the good with the bad. But I felt like that has kind of gone out the game a lot recently, where you look at some of the top defenders in the Premier League. Your Virgil van Dijks, your Gabriels, the Salibas, and these kind of guys, Ruben Diaz. I mean, you don't really have to have that, do you? Because it's just like they know when to toe. Gabriel obviously different in the early part of his career, but he's like kind of eradicated that from his game. But you don't hear about like top defenders now in the game where you have to take the good with the bad. It's kind of like if you're a top player at the top of your game, you usually put up a standard week in, week out, no matter what.
It depends on the environment. You're talking about top defenders at top teams.
Yeah.
In top environments, Tottenham, he's never really been in that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's just hard to judge. Like in Gabriel, you talk about Gabriel, how was he when the environment wasn't as good? He wasn't as good. And
but he was also not as good as a player back then. Like he's developed a lot since then.
Right, and Romero's okay, fine, but I'm just saying.
Like Romero now to Gabriel then, you can't compare.
Romero now to Gabriel then, yeah. I think you'd probably...
Romero's like a World Cup winner. He's seen as like a world-class player. Gabriel wasn't seen as a world-class player back then.
Don't get me wrong, Romero has to take responsibility for it as well. Of course, he needs to shape up and he needs to set himself higher standards. But at the end of the day, it's hard to judge like him up against Van Dijk playing for Klopp's Liverpool. It's just different. It's such a different environment. Like as I've said, I think if you put Romero in that City side, the Liverpool side, the Arsenal side, I don't think you get as many of these incidences, in my opinion. But obviously, we'll not know until he's in that. It's kind of the chicken or the egg thing, but that's just how I read. Because I think we see it for Argentina, he doesn't get sent off all the time for them because he's in a different environment. And I think if you put him in a better environment, you'll get a world-class defender.
Yeah, I do agree to a certain extent. The only thing I have, the biggest thing I have with Romero is, like I've mentioned so many times, I don't want to keep on repeating itself, but you know, he should be holding himself to a higher standard. That's just all I think about Romero, and I think it's hard to argue against that.
But it's a weird thing. We're kind of asking Romero to hold him to a higher standard than the club hold themselves to.
Yeah, he should.
But it's a weird dichotomy. It
is weird, but at the end of the day, he is captain. He thinks that the club should be a lot better. He always is complaining and jabbing at the club, and he's a World Cup winner. He should have the highest of higher standards, and in terms of professionalism, that should be the bare minimum. When he talks about Van de Ven, he says he's top, he can be as good as he wants, his ability to cover ground is phenomenal, top mentality, very coachable. So yeah, I mean, nothing we don't know on Mickey Van de Ven.
Yeah, it was one interesting thing he said. He talked about his heading. He thinks he needs to improve his heading and stuff. Yeah. He says he has improved that. From what we've seen this season, he says when it comes to him coming up against any attacker, he won't get out-muscled or especially outrun against anyone. He can take anyone on. He also backed him to have a fantastic World Cup for the Dutch national team. He said you'll see him starting for the national team, and I'm sure he'll have a great World Cup. So he also said you don't want to get onto Van de Ven's wrong side because his dad is part of the Secret Service. So that's one thing to notice. But yeah.
And then he touched on the Man City situation from a couple of years ago when Spurs fans wanted to lose, and he kind of snapped back at it and got quite angry about the, the Arsenal title thing situation. And he says, I understand the rivalry, but I couldn't represent the club wanting to lose. I want to win every game. We finished 2 points off fourth. If we'd have won the game, we might have made Champions League. The frustration isn't Arsenal winning the league, it's Tottenham winning nothing. Let me fix that. And he did say that it's probably one of my regrets that I didn't win one in terms of a North London derby, and I know what it would mean to the fans. He did also mention that he obviously came from Celtic and he knows exactly what it is to be in a rivalry with Rangers and Celtic. He lived and breathed it for a couple of years, and he said that when he won the league with Celtic, he got more texts the night that Rangers lost the Europa League final that year than Celtic actually won the league. But yeah, I mean, he also mentioned, which I found quite interesting to say, he said that if he was a fan of Tottenham, he probably would have felt the same way as the fans in that Man City game. But as a manager, obviously, he can't feel that way.
I think this is a lot of hindsight talking on this aspect, because when at the time it was a case of he was going in on the fans. He was saying, even after the game, he was saying, in the last 24 hours has showed me how bad the foundations are at this club. And he didn't take it seriously at all, the fact that Tottenham fans might want to lose this game. Obviously he shouldn't take it seriously, but he was kind of saying the suggestion is ridiculous and obviously it's not true. He did later apologise, if I remember, in a press conference, saying, look, I clearly got that wrong and this is obviously something. But I think I think a lot of what he's saying now is definitely with the advantage of hindsight, because at the time he was not saying this stuff, and he wasn't saying if I was a fan I'd feel the same or anything like I could feel the same, anything like that. I think obviously what he's saying is true. You have to represent that you want to win every game, and from his point of view it was an important game because Champions League is obviously, as a club and for him, is very important. So of course it would have been a ridiculous notion for him. But I'm just saying the way he spoke about it wasn't in the same tone he's speaking about it now, and I think it's with the benefit of hindsight.
Yeah, I think at the time he should have just been like, look, the fans can feel how they want to feel, but for me, this game is a very important game and I want to win it, and that's it, and that would have been case closed. And I think everyone could have accepted it at the time, but he kind of laid into the fans at the time. And Thomas Frank got a lot of criticism for him laying into the fans, and quite rightly so, and Ange got the same amount of criticism, I felt.
Yeah, but it was a bit different. Ange never said they're not true fans or anything. He kind of said he kind of brushed off the idea that it was nonsense. He didn't think it was true. He was kind of thought it was a stupid suggestion from a journalist that someone would be thinking that. And then obviously it turned out that it was true, and there were a lot of fans who were quite happy to lose this game. And then he kind of apologised, but he never said these guys are not true fans or anything specific like that. But obviously when you're watching a manager say that, kind of scoff at the idea of being ridiculous when you feel that way. Obviously, it's going to rub a lot of fans up the wrong way. Yeah, but look, and he also mentioned how we had an incident with a fan on that day, saying that the fan shouted at him saying, "You never try this hard in other games," and then he turned around, had a go, saying, "See me outside" or something, having him out, which is ridiculous. And then he said, "I'm trying to win a game for your football club, and you're having a go at me," and he felt that was ridiculous. Yeah, which was a bit ridiculous.
I think Ange had a lot of altercations with the fans. It wasn't just one. There was one at Fulham away as well at the tunnel when he was walking in. There was other different situations. There was obviously the cupping.
I think the Fulham one was a rival fan.
Was it a rival fan? I thought it was this. Maybe. I thought it was a Spurs fan. But anyway, there were a couple of other moments that I can't remember off the top of my head.
There was a few times he walked down that tunnel and then came back out. And
and there was obviously the ear cupping moment, which you turned Ange out after that moment. Mm-hmm. So there were quite a few moments where him and the fans had a frosty relationship, let's say.
Yeah, true.
And then he went on to talk about the feeling about the Spurs project and ending, and he said, "We went through the tough period, got the reward at the end, and I had those players in the palm of my hands. There was something to build, but fear kicks in because we finished 17th and people don't want another season like that. If I go back to Tottenham in 10 years, I'm sure I'll be received well because of the Europa League win." And yeah, I mean, I think that's completely true. for whatever anyone says, if you are Ange in, Ange out, whatever, as soon as he wins that trophy, he becomes a legend at this football club. European trophy is nothing to be scoffed at, no matter who the opposition is, no matter what time or place it is. If you win a European trophy as a manager, you've got to be, you're on a pedestal above a lot of other managers. And the reality is, the only 3 managers that have won European trophies at this football club is Ange Postecoglou, Bill Nicholson and Keith Birkinshaw. And obviously Keith Birkinshaw and Bill Nicholson did a hell of a lot more for this football club than Ange, but Ange is still in that mould. He's a European winner. So he will be remembered fondly at this football club, no matter, because when you look back at it in 50 years, you know, nobody's going to look at the league position. Everyone's going to say, like, we won the Europa League in 2025.
Exactly.
That's what people are going to look back on.
Yeah, I never really understand. There are some fans, I guess it must be just a social media thing, but there are some fans who just continually want to bash him for some reason and always want him to fail or want to make fun of him. I don't really get it, but look, that's just me. I think for sure he's absolutely right. He's going to go down as a very popular figure. I hope one day, you know, come out for a halftime interview or something, and he'll get a good reception, I'm sure. And people, because of how it did end on a good note at the end of the day, and you know that he had that moment at the parade and everything. So I think the lasting memory is definitely a positive one, and people will look back at that. When it comes to what he said before, yeah, look, this is the feeling I had. This is what I was wanting to carry on, because I always felt like, as I've said, we do need a project. As much as I was very much I wanted Frank out and stuff, I'm not alien to the fact we do need a project at this club. We do need stability. I think that is important, and I think I've always said, you know, if you've got something you can build on, you can keep together, and you're going in a certain direction, you know, it's worth keeping if you can. You have to find reasons to keep it together and continue on the same path to grow with something rather than just chuck it away. And there were I think the reasons to keep it were stronger than the reasons to chuck it, in my opinion. But, you know, we did end up chucking it away, but we did the worst thing ever, which is chuck it away and go in 180 direction to an uninspiring mid-table manager. And he was gone within 7 months. So we made an absolute disastrous decision after sacking Ange. But for me, sacking Ange is also a bad decision, because he had the players on board. How often do the managers get sacked when, you know, they have the players still on board? It's quite, you know, usually they've lost the dressing room. That's the main factor, and he didn't. So, as I've said, we went through all that pain last season, losing all those games, all the injuries, everyone getting all those criticism. But we ended up with that Europa League. You came out with that season with success. And his theory was, you know, if they can get through that, we're never going to have a season as bad as that when it comes to injuries. I mean, right now we currently are. But his theory anyway was, you know, that's like the worst of it. That was like rock bottom, kind of how low we could get. And if you could still come out with that situation with success, they're going to feel like they're unbeatable. They're going to, you know, have more belief than ever before because of it. And we obviously didn't build on that. We went in a different direction. Look, I would say the bigger failing was who we replaced him with rather than sacking him. I agree with that. But I still think it was a mistake to sack him, given who was on offer.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Look, in hindsight, sacking Ange for Frank was an absolute terrible move. Look, I still stand by what I say in terms of I don't think sacking Ange was the biggest problem, but I totally agree. Going to Frank from Ange was the biggest kind of mistake that this football club has made. And if you ask me what I would do then, if it's a straight shootout between those two managers, then I would side with Ange. But I might have favoured a different manager over him. Like, let's say a Pochettino was available, or someone like that in that mould was available, then I probably would have gone for him. But when I was at the parade, I was definitely more Ange in there than I'd been in the past 6 or 7 months. And on the back of that, it was probably he probably deserved to keep his job to the start of the season, at least, to see what can kind of manifest from it. And if you get off to a really bad start, and after 3 months of the season and you can just see it's not going in the right direction, then yeah, you maybe make the change at that point. But look, don't get away. I was Ange out for a large part of the season last year, and I think it was mainly down to obviously to the performances in the Premier League. And yeah, I know there were different situations on why that happened, but it was happening, and he should have found ways to get at least small amount of different results. But it wasn't the case. We won the Europa League, and probably off the back of that, the club should have seen the good faith that he had at that point with the fan base and with the players, and made the decision to keep him on for at least the start of the season.
I think we're also seeing this season, especially, as another example of how tough the Premier League is. I think in previous years, you could maybe go through like the injury crisis or have a bit of a drop off and still maintain a certain level of performance and still be getting some fair results. I think we've seen in the last couple of years, there's so many teams that have just, if you have a little drop off for even 10 or 11 games, you barely win a game. Like it's happened with Palace, it's happened with Brighton, it's happened with us, West Ham. It's like so many teams are having these long winless runs. I mean, obviously it happened with United last season as well. I think it's evidence that how competitive the league is just growing and growing, and how you need those strength in numbers, that strength in depth. And if you have any sort of drop off physically or quality wise, you get found out. And I think you get found out more than ever now. And I think we've been the victim of it. And maybe we were also the victims of not catching up to that, what that realization before it was too late, and we were in the middle of what happened last season when we should have prepared for it, but we didn't. And I think that's obviously Ange's part failure for that, but I think that overall it's the club failure because the same things happened this season. Yeah. So I think the club has massively underestimated.
We're actually more prepared this season than we were last season.
Yeah, I think the club have massively underestimated what predicament they have themselves in. And I think our budget and even though it's not as big as the big clubs, our budget alone has been enough in recent years to just keep us into mid-table or European spots. That ain't enough anymore. It ain't enough.
Yeah, I mean, you look back at like the Pochettino times, and in a couple of those seasons, we just got so lucky because like injuries were really down to a minimum. I remember one season, I can't remember which one it was, where we barely got an injury, and we were able to play like a similar 11 pretty much every game. And then obviously injuries started to happen as it kind of progressed, and Harry got some injuries. And I know in that season, I think Harry did get like a 3-month injury, but I think that was our only kind of long-term injury throughout that whole season. So now we just don't get that luck, do we? We just don't get it. It's like kind of tenfold every season. It's getting more and more injuries.
Yeah, I think there's a few things like we haven't prepared for. The intensity and the physicality of the Premier League has increased, the quality has increased, and the depth of squads has increased, and we just like haven't prepared for any of this. And it's like it's happened without us knowing. It's like we're so horribly run from the top side. No one is like taking notice of it. I think Arsenal are very much on top of it. I know, whatever they're going through. They're on top of the fact that you need physicality, you need squad depth, you need higher quality. They're on top of all those things. Same with Man City. They're also on top of those things. It's like we're just looking at it and we're just like, oh, we'll be fine with Santini. Like it's crazy how we're run. It really is. Yeah. And I think Ange was a big victim of it, in my opinion.
Well, let's be honest. Every manager is.
Yeah.
Every single manager.
No, but I think it's even worse. Like even worse than it. Like even it's accelerated even in the last few years, I would say.
Like, just remember, like, even under Jose Mourinho, when we went out of the Champions League, like, we couldn't even field a team that day against Leipzig. No,
but that's my point. That team, right? We had so many injuries, yet we were still able to maintain a certain level of league position. We ended up, in 7th or something, because the league was in a different place. I think it's even accelerated in the last, 2-3 years. It's accelerated fast.
Yeah, because every team has got richer, every team is more capable, and every team has risen their levels. So, 100%, yeah. So, that is Ange on the overlap. I don't think it was as kind of jaw-dropping as the last one last week. I think he kind of said all the hard-hitting facts about the Tottenham ownership and about how all the fans are feeling last week. But it was still interesting to hear him talk about things and Forest and Spurs.
One other quote that was fairly interesting, just that came to mind. He was asked if he would ever go back to Celtic. And he kind of answered this question in terms of whether to come back to Tottenham. He was kind of like, I don't go back. Like, that's not kind of what I want to do in my career. I'm always looking forward. So that kind of, if anyone had any lingering, like, if would Ange ever come back, I guess that answers it. But then again, you never truly know unless he has the job offer on the table. So I don't think that's coming anytime soon. But if anyone, people always saying, in the comments, bring Ange back, get him back. Well, he says he wouldn't go back. So
yeah, well, there you have it. We can close the book. We can close the book on that Tottenham chapter. But anyway, let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Was there anything you noticed maybe we haven't picked up on, or anything that we did pick up on that you have a few comments on? Let us know down below. But thank you everyone for joining us. Like, subscribe and comment. And as always, come on you Spurs.